So, Mark, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all who are joining us. But I'm particularly pleased to be joined this morning for a conversation with Steve Bagshaw and Lord Callanan. So welcome to you both. So what I wanted to do was really to have a conversation, and I'm going to start from the point of view of COVID, which is maybe not an obvious starting point if we're talking about towards net zero. But it struck me looking back over the past 9 months that in terms of our response to COVID, it's been absolutely astonishing how we've both generated and shared knowledge, how we've applied that knowledge, developed new treatments, how we've repurposed manufacturing to produce PPE, how we've developed our research to the point of having vaccines which are currently being administered, and for having a whole variety of testing regimes and testing protocols, and having been able to, if you like, reskill people and redeploy people in order to be able to deliver on that. And I know, Steve, you've been on the vaccines task force, so you've been very much in the thick of it. And I just wondered, have you got any initial thoughts around what we've learned from our ability to be truly innovative and to work at speed in terms of dealing with coronavirus, and how we might translate that into moving towards net zero?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for the welcome, and it's great to be back at an IBioIC conference. It feels like February and the start of the year isn't complete if you're not at the IBioIC conference. So great, and congratulations for such a great event being put on here. 12 months ago, when I was attending, I did not know what the next 12 months had, nor did anyone else. And within 3 months of the start of the new year, I joined this task force that had been brought together to initially start to say, vaccines are going to be important here. Let's not drop the ball from a manufacturing point of view. And that urgency has seen itself all the way through in parallel with an organization, I think, that's been that double act of having expertise, but organized and with leadership and a real market pull, to use the phrases which I think we can use for net zero as well, I think is the vaccine story here, where obviously the world wanted vaccines to happen because that was the way they saw out the crisis. Yes, there was the know-how in the world as to how to do it, but it would have normal times taken us years to do what's been done in 9 months. And a collaboration between government, regulators, industry, academia, and then across a set of skills that don't just include manufacturing, don't just include deployment, don't just include the NHS. It's got all that joining up piece, you know, right at the center of it. When they were recruiting the vaccine task force project management team, I've been on a few big projects in my life. I've never seen such a fantastic organization as was put in place to make that happen. And so I think you've got to get all that skills, all of that right, and look at that story. Of course, it was being done in America at the same time. Of course, it was being done in Europe at the same time. And if you look at the differences between Operation Warp Speed or some of the European activities, one of the pieces that the UK managed on vaccines was to be just totally joined up. And that is the piece that we've got to get right for this next step. I think if I look back and just to keep it very brief in terms of the learning, get joined up across all the modalities, the functionalities, the people you need, access expertise, and have assets on the ground. We were quite fortunate in the UK to have scale-up assets available. They weren't designed as scale-up assets. Those scale-up assets were actually commercially available capabilities that we turned into the scale-up assets for vaccines. The actual Vaccine Manufacturing Innovation Centre is still another year away, which was going to be the scale-up place for pandemics. So we were nearly there, but we must do the same in net zero, having that commercialization and scale-up line of sight of how do you go from this idea today to something that within a year you could have on the ground.
Thank you, Steve. So a lot of things that we might pick up on there, but you talked about that market pool, which is interesting. And we need to think about where's the market pool to be able to deliver net zero. Lord Callanan, may I come to you and ask, what do you think government's role is in, if you like, generating the right environment to unleash innovation on this ambition we have towards net zero? Because I also notice in your very broad portfolio of responsibilities, you've got better regulation in there as well. So where do you feel government can play the best role in all of this?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dan, and it's a great pleasure to join you this morning. I'm delighted to be taking on the role of representing your sector, the biotech sector, in government. And actually, the reason that I'm taking on is because my colleague Nadeem Zahawi, of course, is now heading up the vaccines rollout effort. And let me start by paying tribute to Steve and his colleagues for the fantastic work that they've done in rolling out the vaccine, getting it established, getting it all pulled together. As he said, the Vaccines Task Force have done an absolutely tremendous job, and I can't praise them more highly. You know, it's been, so those of us who are kind of quite cynical sometimes about the ability of government to organise anything and getting it done, I suppose the ultimate lesson is get out the way, give them the resources and the backing to do it, and let the industry and the professionals get on with it. And there's a tremendous lesson there for us. They have done an absolutely fantastic job, and obviously, you know, we all know, we've seen the news, we are world leaders in this, so well done. How did it happen? Well, you know, obviously we worked across the supply chain, we worked with the supply chain to fund the rapid response research. You know, we put our money where our mouth is. We invested over 300 million in scaling manufacturers' capabilities. We used an accelerated review and approval process with the regulators. And I think you're right to pick up the issue of regulation, which, as you say, is another one of my responsibilities. How can we deploy that same sense of urgency to deal with COP26? It'll be a challenge. Obviously, it's not. It's more of a sort of slow burning problem than an immediate sort of international impact. And of course, we have to bear in mind the impact that COVID-19 has had. But of course, the threat still exists, and we certainly remain committed to engaging individuals, communities, and businesses to drive climate action, particularly working up towards COP26 in Glasgow later this year. And while significant change is underway, it has to accelerate in all areas of the economy and society to deliver the resilient zero carbon world that we all want to see. And that requires many actors: supply, demand, finance, civil society, policy, all working together very much in the same way as the vaccines professionals did to produce such a tremendous results. We are seeing some good results coming together. The UK is a world leader here. We're the first to legislate. Our emissions are coming down faster than virtually any other country in Europe. But we do know we have to do more. There's a huge strategy ahead of us. Heat and buildings is a particularly difficult sector to decarbonize, for instance. But we're getting on with it. We're producing lots of strategies, but we've got to implement them on the ground, and we can only do that with partnership with industry and others such as yourself.
Thank you. And I'm thinking, just listening to what you say, and we know the task ahead of us in terms of dealing with climate change. And we had a talk from Lord Debon at our conference yesterday, and you know, he made the point that there is no vaccine for climate change. So it's a pretty tough gig to be able to deal with climate change. From a government point of view, what do you think the role of regulation is in that? I mean, how can it be enabling to allow us to deal with the issues in front of us?
It's a difficult question to answer because it depends in what sector you're talking about regulation. And getting regulation right is always very difficult. There's always a challenge in government ways that we want to get free business from regulation. We all want to release the power of innovation to power the economy ahead. But of course, regulation fundamentally is about public protection. And I spent many years in the European Parliament, And what I thought was interesting there was the degree to which every regulation has an industry sponsor and an industry defender, often in many cases. And some of the biggest defenders of appropriate regulation and strong regulation are the industry themselves. But there's no question that we have to look at regulations across the piece. We have to try and see, if you like, the carrot and the stick approach. We will want to incentivize people to change their behavior. And we will do that through a mixture of policy levers, but we need to put the right regulation in place as well. And we're seeing that as we move up towards buildings and trying to decarbonize heat and process as well.
Okay, so Steve, I'm thinking we were talking about, or you raised this issue about market pool, and there was massive market pool in terms of dealing with coronavirus, and it's harder to identify how you create that market pool and de-risk the sort of application of innovation into the net zero agenda. It is quite difficult. Have you got any thoughts about how it could be a more attractive playing field for people to get involved? Because across the UK, I think that we're absolutely clear that there's no lack of innovation, there's no lack of new knowledge and people being able to think about applying that knowledge. But the difficult part is often the translation, is getting that knowledge to be taken up by industry who don't see what very crudely put, what's in it for them. So, you know very well, to be honest, you're in an interesting position. You know business very well, but you also know the research environment very well, and you know government very well. So is there something missing that we could magic up?
Well, I think the magic's happening, actually. I think during this last 12 months, maybe 18 months, you've seen a sea change in people's attitude to plant-based food, if I could call it that. You're starting, so if you look at sort of our area in this world of across the bioeconomy of food, and then you look at the sort of the healthcare, you look at the fuel, and you look at sort of chemicals and materials as sort of like the stuff of life of what we buy every day. You're starting to see huge changes when you go to the supermarket already in the plant-based food sector. And I think if you look at the data coming out of America now in terms of fastest growing sectors for startups, then non-animal based protein is a huge area now. And one of the things I think in the UK we've got to really get our act together on is recognizing that pull has suddenly happened. And that, so for years of people thinking, I wonder where that magic spark is, as you're talking about it. I think we are now seeing that in on the food side of it. I think when Unilever announced their rainbow of color and said, we're going to make sure that by 2027, all of our products are made sustainably. You got this massive piece of news that's transformational, not done by a government, but basically Unilever responding. And you can pick other companies that are making similar responses, but that was the one that I looked at and said, that's a sea change. And so I think, and I don't know if Martin agrees with him, but I think those are the sorts of things that are the magic in this, is actually the public going, wow, we want, this is something that's important. And so investors are saying now more and more, this is something that's important to us. You're watching it happen. And I think that's why this COP26 year is such a big year. I quite like the phrase, the race to zero, that the government's coined for companies to grab here, because that's exactly what's now starting to happen. You're seeing people do it. And okay, you'll still find people going and buying food on price. But I think as you buy on price, we're going to have to also start people buying on price in more sustainable products. And that's the bit I think that, you're starting to see happen.
Okay, and actually, and another thing you said, and the Minister might have a view on this, but I suppose traditionally in the UK, we were a manufacturing country. We used to manufacture for the rest of the world, and that's changed. But you highlighted in your initial part of the conversation that you thought part of the success in addressing COVID was the fact that we had the manufacturing to join up with the knowledge and the generation. And I'm just wondering from the minister's point of view that this is a big task for government, isn't it? Because in a way we've identified that smart manufacturing and of course, high value jobs that would be attached to that. How do we rekindle or recreate that kind of industry? And if I think, for example, if we had been having this as a real face-to-face conference, we would have been in Glasgow, and my own university has, along with Scottish Government, has been central to setting up the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland, and that joins with a cluster of the Advanced Forming Research Centre and the Lightweight Manufacturing Research Centre. So all about smart manufacturing. Is this a focus for government that we can hope to see scale up centres, manufacturing and so on?
Very much so, and there's a danger in this panel of us all agreeing too much with each other, but I totally agree with everything that Steve had to say. Collaboration is key, breaking down barriers, opening up innovation, and there could be physical barriers. So your reference to clusters of bioeconomy is particularly important, breaking down social barriers by ensuring public perception of the problem, and Steve is totally right. A lot of this change is being driven by public, customer, consumer pressure. One of my department's priorities is very much innovation. We know that we need to move forward with making the UK a science superpower. We need to continue with the momentum of innovation from the development of COVID-19 vaccines that we all saw, and take the lessons learned around how effective collaboration across stakeholders and sectors can help to lead to positive outcomes. And in your own sector, we have examples of this. Strengths of collaboration across industry have resulted in the development of the vaccines, as I mentioned earlier. And collaboration of government and industry through the bioeconomy strategy are helping to deliver actions representative of industry's priorities. So there is, we are doing a lot. We are a leading investor and innovator globally, and we've invested something like 300 million of public funding in engineering, biology research. We want to drive the percentage of R&D in the economy up to 2.4% of GDP, which would be, particularly given the pressure on public spending, would be a difficult ask, but we're determined to do it. We need to do it if we're to move the economy forward.
So you had a lot of experience when you were a member of the European Parliament, and for some time I was in Brussels too as Chief Scientific Advisor to President Barroso. And one of the things that struck me was, obviously you know your own country well, so I knew the UK well. And then when I visited a number of other European countries, and I suppose the two that stick in my mind were Denmark and Germany, that when I went to either small companies or indeed larger companies, the atmosphere was very different in particularly in Denmark, but also in Germany, in terms of actually the collaborative nature within a company was very strong. And I wondered sometimes whether we had a problem in the UK. So I'm extrapolating here from a sample size of 1, so this is just my impression. But that I felt that in the UK it was very structured, quite hierarchical, quite traditional. We've always done it like this. This is the way we do things. Whereas I just didn't see that from my limited experience when I was visiting other countries. And I wondered, is that part of why sometimes we don't immediately react to the innovative approach, the new idea or whatever, because it's all, oh, this is not how we do it and so on. I'm just interested from a government point of view, if you identified any shortcomings in our kind of, almost like structural shortcomings around being able to absorb innovation?
I'm not sure I quite agree with that from your small
That's
sample.
what I was hoping for.
I mean, it varies from company to company. Obviously, the exciting thing that I see doing my job is that, you know, I do get to meet many companies, businesses, and it is incredible, some of the work that is going on. We have the science base, we have the research base, we have some of the, you know, the best scientists, engineers, inventors in the world. Where we've sometimes lacked the ability is to take those inventions and, you know, scale them up into manufactured products that can impress on the world stage. So it's the innovation part of it, and the scaling up, which is, I think, where we lack sometimes presence. But, you know, there are some fantastic examples of work that has gone on, an excellent collaboration that has taken place, and it varies so much from company to company. And I think what many businesses are finding is that if you do try and do things the old way, the slow way, you're going to get left behind in the global race. And you know, somebody else in some other part of the world is going to be doing it better, faster, and more effectively than you. But there are many examples where we are doing it right in this country, and where we do have some leading innovative companies working together in partnerships with the academic community. And you know, we have to try and encourage that. You know, but there's always a danger in government trying to get itself too involved in this collaboration. We need to set the stage, we need to put the investment in, we need to provide the basic science and the basic work, but let the professionals, the businesses like Steve and his colleagues get on with it.
Okay, so Steve, when I'm thinking about you getting on with the hard task in hand, so this is a bit of a left field question, but I'm wondering whether, given, you know, you look in both ways, so you look at academia, you look at government, and then you're in business, would you like to see more scientists and engineers in government? Now, I'm aware that Lord Callanan is electrical engineering, I think is your background.
But I had a proper job many years ago.
Yeah. But one of the things that struck me in kind of chief scientific advisor roles is when you're talking to policymakers and to government, there's often you know, a translation problem in that, you know, sometimes it's very hard to properly convey what the potential is or how the innovation can be pertinent to government's tasks in hand. Do you think it would help? Because I'm looking at the, you know, UK civil service, it's predominantly comes from arts and humanities background. So Steve, have you ever come across that and thought it was a problem or not?
Well, I think one of the crucial things here is, I use the word collaboration. I think if you've got people in government who are specialists that are prepared to collaborate and listen, and I think going back to the vaccine task force, there's been, you know, it wasn't run by scientists and engineers. It was run by people that knew how to get things done in government, because that's a skill set in its own. However, what was woven in through the fabric was that expertise and that ability to bring in scientists, engineers, manufacturing professionals, supply chain professionals, people who have got business experience. And I think that's the critical piece. I don't think it matters what the character of what the background of the person is. It's the way in which they fulfill that role that's important, and that collaborative piece, I think, is the difference sometimes that you see between, say, in a small country like Denmark. You will get that sense of we're all in this together, in a collaborative way, where sometimes you don't see that in bigger countries. And it's not just the UK. You know, you'll see that across the world, where you lose that connection maybe with what we're trying to do here together. So I'm very keen on that. If I may say, the other thing I'm keen on is having something that's long term. And I think one of the problems I've got in this next couple of weeks is going to be making sure that the next piece, what Callanan just, the plan for growth is something that builds on this, and we don't lose the direction that we started here, because I do think we need long-term. That's not just an engineer's idea. I think we need long-term strategy in business, and I'm really hoping that the industrial strategy doesn't lose its way somehow in this next 12 months by changing titles and names, because I think that's important too in part of government.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. Lord Callanan, I'm just I'm dipping into the Q&As at the bottom of the screen here, and we won't be able to answer all of them. But there's one interesting question here from Martin Kingsley about what metrics are the government using to measure efforts that industry is making towards net zero? You know, are there specific metrics, and would that be useful, do you think?
Well, there are metrics in terms of we're obviously asking companies and businesses to sign up to the, as Steve said, the race to net zero. We want to showcase as many of those companies, businesses as possible at COP26, and it's about, you know, incentivizing customers and others. There is already a lot of campaigning effort going on the ground. But you know, these things are always best if they're done voluntarily, if companies accept the need to move towards net zero. As you indicated earlier, there's a lot more pressure from financiers. The ex-governor of the Bank of England is leading task force on green finance here. We're introducing the TCFD, the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, will be compulsory in the UK soon, so companies will have to report in their annual report on the progress that they're making towards net zero. So that there are a number of things that we can do in the arena, but ultimately these things are always best if they're done voluntarily. But we will all have to get there. It's now a legal requirement. You know, Parliament has legislated for it. So by 2050 we have to get to net zero, and that requires action across all sectors in government and business to put in place early levers that will move us towards on that trajectory down to net zero.
Thank you. So I mean, it is, and I keep coming back to that initial thing Steve said at the beginning about market pull, and in fact, in terms of, you know, getting industry to react and having good metrics, I think at the end of the day, it all comes from people, citizens, and if citizens want net zero and they're demanding that of their government, whichever government it is, then I think that empowers government to do it. So we talked about responsibilities earlier on, and of course, a government has heavy responsibility, but so do individuals. So do all of us. And so coming to that, because I knew this would happen, our 30 minutes has just disappeared. But I wanted to ask you both a question just at the end, and it was about this. I wanted to ask you what challenge, and Steve, I'll come to you first, and then I'll come to the Minister. What challenge would you set our audience today at this conference to ensure everybody makes a contribution to the urgency around harnessing biotechnology for delivering net zero? So what would your challenge be?
Well, if I'm only allowed one challenge, I'd challenge everybody that there aren't enough people who get it out there yet, and the people that are watching this, you get it. So please share the fact you get it and talk about it in language that people understand in your everyday life, and get people enthused, inspired by what we're talking about here, and particularly get children and the parents of children who are making career choices as to what to do next excited about what vaccines has done and what science has done to create vaccines, and get them excited about science, because all of what we're talking about is actually a 30-year game we're playing here. It is urgent now, but it's going to be urgent for the next 30 years. And it's going to need today's 8 and 10-year-olds excited about this stuff so they make the right career choices. So that would be my one ask.
Okay, and I will certainly do that. So I'll move now to the Minister. Minister, what would your challenge be?
Okay, firstly, how can research and innovation in biotechnology help to deliver against these current priorities? You know, please tell us, liaise with the department. How do we put this technology at the forefront of minds when thinking about solutions to net zero, but also other global issues? And how can the UK maintain the leading position that we do have in this area while we continue to establish strong international relationships?
Okay, thank you. So you're most definitely saying you're in listening mode.
Always in listening mode. Always looking for good ideas and good suggestions.
Okay, well, to the 797 people who are registered for this conference, you heard the Minister. So your inbox is going to be full, I think. Right, I need to bring this to a close now, and my great thanks, a lovely conversation which I've enjoyed, to Lord Callanan, Steve Bagshaw. Thank you very much indeed. And now, Mark, back to you. Thank you.